Well, welcome to Writing and Illustrating 101. My name's Susan Eady. I'm the co-RA for the Mid-South SCBWI.
My name is Erica Rogers. I am the other co-RA for Mid-South SCBWI.
I'm Chris Sexton, and I'm the Assistant Regional Advisor for Mid-South SCBWI.
And I'm Mary Yules. I'm the Illustrator Coordinator for the Mid-South.
Okay, writing and illustrating for kids and teens. So again, I'm Susan Eady. I am an author and an illustrator, and of picture books. I do all of my illustrations out of modeling clay. All of my most of the books that I have written have been illustrated by other people, and most of the books that I have illustrated have been written by other people. I was an art director for 15 years. I've been a judge for the Audie Awards for 14 years, and I've been a member of the SCBWI for more years than I can count.
I'm Erica Rogers again. I'm an author of young adult fantasy. My book, Lady of Steel and Straw, will be coming out next summer, but that's all I can say. I'm represented by Holly Root of Root Literary, who is brilliant, and I have been part of SCBWI Mid-South for, oh dear Lord, almost 15 years now, but I've been helping out and volunteering for about 10, so.
And I'm Chris Sexton, and I'm a very long-time member of SCBWI. I'm an illustrator and a graphic designer, and I've done a lot of educational and editorial type illustration and all sorts of other things. It's a real mixed bag.
And this is me. I illustrate picture books, leveled readers, chapter books, book covers. I used to be an animator, but I always had a dream of getting into book illustration. So I have actually been a member of SCBWI. We're probably rounding out 20 years now, but I've been involved with the conference and the leadership team for about 10 years. So I think we're going to jump into, now that you guys know a little bit about us, we're going to jump into the three things, the top things you need to know to get your work up on a slide like that.
Okay, so here are the top three things that a writer should know. So first of all, you want to know what kind of book you've written. So you've been working hard, you've been writing for a year, couple of years, and are you really sure what you have there? Do you have a picture book? Do you have a chapter book? Do you have a middle grade book? Do you have a YA book? So here are some of the categories so you know what you've written. So the Kidlit categories, we're going to start with board books. So the genres are all over the place. You can have the same genres in board books as you have in adult fiction and in adult literature. So you can have fiction, you can have nonfiction, you can have biography, you can have science, you can have, concept books. For board books, they are for the very young. We're looking at 0 to 100 words. Often they're a reprint of a picture book that is just it's printed on a board so babies can chew on it and nothing bad will happen. They are often simple concepts like alphabet or counting or rhyming books, but they are also hard concepts that have been simplified. For instance, Charles Bridge has a whole line of nonfiction baby books. They have physics, they have coding, they have all kinds of sciences, biology, botany. So board books, they run across all genres. So next, we're going to look at picture books. Now, picture books are probably the most common category for new authors to write. I think sometimes people think, oh, they're so short, they'll be so easy. Well, that's not the case. They are not so easy, but it is a very, very common, it's a very, very common category. So picture books are anywhere from 50 to 1,000 words. They also can be any genre. They can be nonfiction, biography. Usually they are narrative fiction with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Whatever they are, a picture book is something you can sit somebody down in your lap or beside you and have a read aloud experience. So 500 words is really the sweet spot for picture books. And you will also find some concept books like I'll Meet You in Your Dreams by Jessica Young. So again, they run the gamut of genre. The next, we're going to look at easy readers. So easy readers are for that emerging independent reader when, it's just such a big deal whenever they know that they can actually read a book with chapters. So the chapters are small. They're short chapters. They have a fast pace. They're highly illustrated. Usually about 1,500 to 3,500 words. They're often done in series. They're interesting subjects. Again, as I said, fast paced because you're trying to keep the emerging reader's attention and you're helping to build their confidence with learning a new vocabulary and seeing that they can read a few pages and they've gotten through a chapter. So that's an easy reader. So the next step up from there is chapter books. So chapter books are just the next step, 4,000 to 10,000 words. They're more complex. The chapters are longer. The age is a little older, from 7 to 10, and chapter books themselves have there's a real variety in their difficulty. Usually they are narrative fiction. And they are illustrated, but they're not as highly illustrated as easy readers. So usually they're in a series. For instance, Debbie Dady's Mermaid Tales, she has more than 20 books in that. Finley Flowers by Jessica Young is a series. Piper Morgan by Stephanie Ferris is a series. Debbie Dady has several different chapter book lines. She has more than 160 books to her name. Now, all of the authors and the illustrators that you're going to see on these slides, these are all your neighbors. These are all Mid-South authors and illustrators. So they can do it. You guys can do it too. So again, it's a little bit more difficult vocabulary. It's just the next step up. So from there, we have graphic novels. So graphic novels are a comic book format, but they can be anything from age 8 all the way to adult. There are some really hard lessons in some graphic novels for adults. But we're talking about the ones for kids. They tell the stories in a sequence with words and pictures in a sequence across a page. And again, they can be any genre. They can be nonfiction. They can be biography. They can be fantasy. They're often chapter books. Recently, are often being reprinted as graphic novels. Graphic novels have become very popular. So you'll see, just like Debbie Dady, one of her most popular chapter books has been reprinted as a graphic novel. And again, these are all Mid-South authors and illustrators. Janet Lee did all the wonderful illustrations for the Sea Sirens, and Rachel Elliott was the writer and the illustrator for The Real Riley Mays.
All right, middle grade novels. This is a super fun place to write. You will see in general, middle grade novels have about 30,000 to 50,000 words, unless they are fantasy. For an example, although they always say not to use the big, huge names for examples, I'm going to anyway. The Harry Potter books, the very first one, Sorcerer's Stone has 76,000 words. And if you go all the way to Deathly Hallows, it has 200,000 words, which is too many. Everybody knows that was too many. But all of that to say that fantasy and sometimes historical fiction tend to get a little more space. And that's because we're not only describing a world, we have to build the world as well. You're building magic. You're not just saying this story takes place in Chicago. You're saying it takes place in Chicago in 1873, and there's magic. And also this is how the magic works. And so fantasy tends to get a little bit more space. In middle grade, the main character is about 11 or 12. And it's often written in a third person point of view. It isn't always, especially contemporary middle grade can step into first person. It's also very fast paced. Middle grade tends to avoid sex and sexuality like overtly, but blossoming romance is definitely a thing. Crushes are a thing. Trying to figure that out. If you think about that middle school space, right? That 6th and 7th grade space, or 5th and 6th grade space, really, 10, 11, 12, they're starting to kind of deal with some of that, but it's not overt and on the page. Drug usage is not really on the page, drugs and alcohol, although you will sometimes see it implied or discussed. Linda Mullally Hunt, actually, her book, Fish in a Tree, deals with some of that from a parental perspective, or about a parent, because these kids do deal with things like that. And that's, literature is a place for them to see themselves, and we get to kind of help kids think through some of these really difficult things. But again, you won't see it on the page. Same thing with graphic violence or really rough language. You may see a curse word here or there, but it's very rare. And there are specific words, and different publishers feel more comfortable with different things. Middle grade does not avoid tough topics, as you'll see on the slide: racism, bullying, death. We all know a beloved childhood book that ends with a dog dying. That's why I tend to avoid middle grade with dogs on the cover, unless they belong to Kristen O'Donnell Tubb. Also, middle grade books tend to be made up of simple sentences that are easy to read, but they're not dumbed down. It's really hard. It's harder than we tend to make the mistake when we're beginning writing for children of thinking that the younger the reader is, the easier it is to write for them. And I actually think that is the most difficult thing, because I think by the time we get to YA, you're writing for small adults, really. And that you can speak how you speak for the most part. When you're writing for younger children, you've got to be really good about being really, really clear and concise, but not talking to them like you think they're dumb, because they will catch it in a heartbeat and they're out. They will not give you any more of their time. Yeah, let's go ahead and go to the YA slide. Then I'll come back and talk about language a little bit more. Young adult tends to be 50,000 to 75,000, again, unless it's fantasy. The ages are of the protagonist is about 14 to 18. And then the ages of your reader is also about 14 to 18 and beyond. Tons of adults love to read YA. You will notice, if you remember, if you're taking notes or if you're rewatching, that the protagonist, the main character that is 13 years old, is missing. They're not here. And that's because most of the time, that's kind of a no man's land of character age. Editors and marketing they don't know what to do with a 13-year-old protagonist. My son is 13 years old. You'd see him walk into a room and you'd think he could drive. He can't. He also just dropped his phone in the driveway and had it run over the other day. So there are this age of reader, or this age of protagonist, that is almost young adult, and definitely not middle grade any longer. They are not 10, 11, 12. They are a lot more mature than that, or they think they are, but they're also definitely not 17 or 18. And so for that reason, the protagonist that is 13 is really hard to sell. So if you're writing someone who is 13 years old, consider either bumping it up solidly into YA or bringing it back down just a year or so, to make it easier. Young adult focuses plot-wise on the turning point from adolescence to adulthood. Young adult characters are discovering who they are in relation to their world. Middle grade characters are discovering who they are in relation to their hometown or their family. They're starting to step out of that a little bit, out of that little bubble, and trying to figure out where they fit in this smaller space. Young adult protagonists are ready to fly. They are ready to leave. They either want to or they're terrified of it, but they are trying to figure out who they are outside of that safe or sometimes very unsafe family space and figure out where they fit in the world. Also, as far as language goes, in young adult, the prose is more varied. Sentences can be long and emotional and fluid and winding, half a paragraph long, or they can be really short and really fast. Grammar is a good thing to know, all the rules, but YA is where you'll start seeing those rules being broken a little bit. Like, we'll never start a sentence with a conjunction. I do it all the time. I actually have to search for but and cut like half of them because I start so many sentences with conjunctions. Character and plot, we already kind of discussed. Make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, so young adult versus adult. The main difference here is that in young adult books, we're still dealing with firsts. We're dealing with, like I said, getting away from home, seeing how you might fit in the world. And so even if your characters are 18, 19, 20, a lot of times if they're still dealing with firsts, first kisses, first true loves, first time taking on responsibility that is kind of an adult thing, it'll still read YA. And that's totally okay. If you think about it, so the book 6 of Crows by Leigh Bardugo is very, the characters may not be older, but they're living in a very adult world. They're living in a ruthless world. They are thieves. They are interacting with other thieves and murderers and mob bosses. And a lot of the themes of that book can feel very adult, but when there's an interview that Leigh Bardugo did where she addresses that, and she and her editor realized that even though they do deal with, her characters deal with a lot of adult content or adult feeling events, on a personal level, they are all still dealing with first kisses, first crushes, the first time they've really taken responsibility and are stepping outside of a comfort zone of some sort. And so it's still very much a coming of age type story. That's really it for young adult and middle grade.
Thank you. Okay, second important thing. So before you start, here are a few things to keep in mind about writing for children. So what are some of the don'ts in writing for children? Well, number one is don't talk down to kids. Kids are really smart, and they really, they will tune out immediately if they think that you're talking down to them. And the same thing goes for preaching or lecturing. Nobody likes to be lectured to. So you'll lose them right away if you've got some, real preachy morality book. So we're all, those of us who are authors out there, we enjoy writing, and you might really love the way that you write a great mood, and you set the scene perfectly, and you can really indulge in the fun part of writing. But don't get so carried away that you forget to put a plot in there. Don't just write feeling stories. You don't want to be all mood and no plot. The next thing is to remember, if you're a picture book writer, remember that the illustrations are going to do 75% of the work. It's a collaborative process between the author and the illustrator. And it also is your secret weapon, because you're always trying to keep word count down, always trying to streamline and use as few words as possible. And you can do that by, instead of using 2 sentences to talk about a scene, you can think, oh, okay, wait a minute, the illustrations can do that. So you can use 2 words, and the illustrations are going to pick up, are going to do the heavy lifting there. But also, when you're creating your book, you want to make sure that adults are not solving problems. We don't want any adult interference. Kids are empowered by reading how other kids solve a problem. And usually that problem solving can lead to a change in the main character. And that's one of the things that you want. You want to strive for having your characters grow and change. So they are one way at the beginning of the story. And by the end of the story, there has been some personal growth and they have changed some. And generally, just don't be too cutesy. Revision. Yes, yes. I know that you've written your book and you think, oh, it's perfect. It is going out there today. I worked so hard on it and I know it's perfect. Well, you really, really want to think about that. So don't be satisfied with your second draft or your third draft or maybe even your 10th draft. I know that when I was working on Poppy's Best Paper, this is an 800-word picture book. I revised that thing at least 80 times. That's one of the things that you're doing. You are constantly upping your game. So you are looking at things and thinking, oh, can I make it better? You write and you write and you write, and then you put it aside for a little while, and then you look at it again and you revise it again. You show it to your critique partners, you get their input, and then you revise again. Just always, always with an eye to upping your game and making it the best that you can. That's what revising is all about. Another way to up your game is to read, read, read. Children's books have changed so much in the last 10 years. So you will find your market research is going to be invaluable to you. You'll want to go to the library, you'll want to go to the bookstore, you'll want to read Publishers Weekly, Goodreads. You are going to get in there and just start to research and read, read, read. Especially if you are trying to say you've written a book about siblings. Well, you want to get in there and you want to read every book that you can find on siblings because you want to know why your book is different. And you want to be able to tell the editor or the agent that you are pitching to why your book is different. That will also give you that research will give you a good knowledge of comp titles. And a comp title is like your book, but it's not like your book. But if it's a popular enough book, then the editor or the agent will know that you've done your research, and they'll get what your book, where your book fits in the market. So keep that in mind. And there's going to be a little bit more about comp titles a little bit later with Mary Yules and Erica Rogers. So manuscript critiques, that is yet another way to up your game. So whenever I go to, conferences are coming back now, thank goodness. And as a matter of fact, we're going to be having a manuscript critique-a-palooza a little bit later on in the year. Having a manuscript critique is a great opportunity. I have been to a million conferences. I have an agent. I still get a manuscript critique every opportunity I can. So I love to be able to pay an editor or an agent to look at my manuscript and tell me what's wrong with it. I want to know what's wrong. How can I make it better? It's hard. You've been working hard on this, and it's, you think it's perfect because you're working on it. You're not giving them just, something that's a first draft. It's something you've really been working on. And it's really hard to put yourself out there, and it can really hurt your feelings whenever you get, a hard critique on something. But be professional, be open-minded, try to be thick-skinned, and listen to what the critiquer has to say. And always remember that you are creating a relationship with this industry professional, so you want to be on your best behavior. I also belong to a critique group, and critique groups are, I love my critique group. They do not let me get away with anything. They are tough, and they are ruthless, and they are kind, and they're honest. And that's exactly what you want. You want to know what's wrong with your manuscript so that you can get better. So portfolio critiques also. A portfolio critique is it's the same situation. You're putting yourself out there, something that you've been working hard on, and you're so proud of your work, and you put it down there and you think, oh, they're going to think that this is the most amazing stuff they've ever seen, and they're going to offer me a book contract right away. Well, that just does not happen in this industry. This industry moves very slowly, so it would be shocking if that were to happen. So put your portfolio out there and ask questions. That's one of the most important things. Sometimes it can be so daunting whenever you're sitting across from a professional, and you can feel kind of tongue-tied and you're nervous, your heart's beating fast. But ask questions. Ask them what their favorite piece is. Ask them what your weakest piece is. Ask them what your next step should be. How can you move forward? And listen with an open heart and try again to be thick-skinned. You can explain a piece, but don't be defensive about your pieces. So just again, use the opportunity to learn how you can get better and be professional. Whenever you're sitting across from an industry professional, you are beginning a relationship with that person. And sometimes it can last for years. I mean, I've been getting portfolio reviews forever, and I see the same art directors over and over at conferences, and we know each other, because you start that relationship right then, the first time you sit across from each other. So Mary Yules is going to tell you more about what you can about ways that an illustrator can make the most out of their work. So I'm going to turn it over to Mary now.
Okay, guys. So I'm going to talk a little bit about things that an illustrator should know, but I will say that some of the stuff that I go over here, this is also tips for writers. So writers you guys don't need to tune out right now. Don't go get your cup of coffee, because some of what I'm talking about as far as an illustrator goes can be helpful for you as well. And one of the points I want to make here is that an illustrator is considered a co-creator of a book. There's never a point where the writer writes the words and they're the ones that are in charge, and they kind of get to tell the illustrator what to do. That's not how this works. The illustrator is allowed to have space to bring their own vision, to the page, to the manuscript, whether it's a picture book or whether it's, an illustrator supported leveled reader or chapter book, or, obviously a graphic novel. Okay, so let's flip forward to the first thing that is very important for illustrators to understand, which is put story in your art. Now, what do I mean by that? We're going to flip forward to the next slide, and I'm going to tell you guys the story of these two images that you see on the screen right now. Okay, so first of all, the image, these are both mine, by the way. The image on the left of the fox and the woodland creatures, I'd had in my portfolio for many years. I had gotten awards for this piece. I had certainly gotten commissions for this piece, from this piece. So I kind of thought of it as my hero piece. And I was having a portfolio critique. Susan just talked about portfolio critiques. I do still have them. Anytime I get a chance to get feedback from the industry is always a good thing. So I'd had this woodland creatures piece in my portfolio for a while. Now, the piece on the right of the girl with the puppets, it was just kind of in my portfolio as a filler piece. I needed it. I needed work in my portfolio. A portfolio is supposed to be between 10 and 12 pieces, and I just needed some spaces filled up, so I had put it in there. And I was sitting with an art director. This was several years ago, and I just at this point had not been able to get the elusive picture book contract. And I didn't understand why. And as he flipped through my portfolio, he said those words to me: what you need in your art is more story. And this was how he explained it. He pointed to the woodland creatures piece, the piece that I thought was my best piece. And he said, I want you to notice how no one is doing anything in this piece. They are all grouped around the mushroom in the same pose. They all have the same expression on their face. It's as if a photographer told them to stop and pose for a picture and then clicked the shutter. And to be honest with you, that is kind of what I thought when I was making that piece. I was just trying to do a group of creatures. And then he went on to point out that there really wasn't a background. We assume that they're in the woods because they're forest creatures, but there is no discernible setting in which they are sitting. So it doesn't tell the viewer anything about what's happening here. So we basically have characters in a boring pose sitting nowhere. And then he flipped over to the piece of the girl with the puppets, and he said, this piece is beginning to get story. And he pointed to how each of the three characters in the piece are sitting slightly differently. And he said, you know, if you had a classroom of kids lined up, they would not all be sitting the same way. They would each be doing their own thing. And then he pointed out how they were all dressed differently and how we could tell a little bit about their character from the clothes they were wearing, from their wardrobe. The fact that the teacher girl has pink barrettes in her hair. She also has a little band of hair coming loose from her barrettes. She's got stripes on her leggings. And he said, this tells me who the character is. And then he went on to say, and you actually have a hint of setting with a billboard with the 3 pieces of paper behind there. Now, I had not actually put a whole lot of thought into this background. I hadn't really put a whole lot of thought into what that character was wearing. But the way he pointed out the differences between these two, I could see it very clearly in that moment. And that's what I mean by put story in your art. Everything that you do to your characters informs the reader about the story. It makes them be unique individual characters, and it makes their setting be a unique individual setting from any other setting they could be in. So from here on out, what you need to do with your art is think about that. You heard me just say I wasn't being very intentional, you know, with either one of these pieces. And that changed on that day many years ago. I began to be very intentional, and still am to this day, to make sure that my characters do, you know, embody some level of story. Okay, so with that being said, we will jump forward to slide 2. And this tip is also for writers. Do not repeat the text with pictures. Now, the reason I say this tip is also for writers is because very often new writers, especially if they're writing a picture book, you know, they're writing, and they're thinking, wow, okay, so I'm gonna do this. This is gonna be about a brown dog. And so then the brown dog walked down the street and picked up the red ball. And in their mind, they're thinking, well, the illustration will show a brown dog walking down the street and picking up a red ball. And that is not what the illustrator's job is at this point. The illustrator's job is to expand upon the text. So the text is going to say one thing and the illustrations are going to say something else. And here's an example of that. This is the illustration repeating the text. So the armadillo and the tadpole looked at each other. The tadpole was in the water. The armadillo was on the land. Also, there were dandelions. So as you can see, there is, you know, the beginning of a story here, but literally everything in the illustration just repeats what the word says. And so this is actually a very weak marriage of text and words. So as an illustrator, you want to go beyond this. And as a writer, you don't want to write what would also be shown in the picture. This is the actual first line of this book. When the 2 friends met, they didn't have a thing in common. And so what the reader hears is that these 2 creatures are going to be friends, but beyond that, we don't know. Nothing in the word says anything about them. The illustrations do all the rest of the work. They tell us that there's an armadillo. They tell us there's a tadpole. The dandelions are not actually important, so they don't need to be said in the words at all, but they do help set the scene in the illustration. Just like I mentioned in tip number 1, it gives us a sense of place. Now, the caveat to that, I always think, especially for picture books, is that when it is something that is very, very important, it should be mentioned in both the words and the illustrations. However, this isn't going to happen on every page. This is going to happen on your climax page. You know, maybe it's when, you know, the jar burst into 1,000 pieces. The words say that, and then the illustration would also show a picture of a jar breaking and cookies scattering everywhere. You're not going to do that on every page. You're going to do that strategically on the pages where it's, you know, absolutely important that we're driving home this point. And then finally, tip number 3, and this is specifically speaking to the traditional publishing model. In just a minute, we'll get to talking about the publishing markets. But as an illustrator, in the traditional publishing sense, you will not work with the writer. I have met only one of the writers who have ever written any of the books that I've illustrated. I have talked to a handful of them at the very end once the book is done, and we're maybe bouncing ideas back and forth on marketing. But in a traditional publishing model, the manuscript is acquired by an editor who then works with an art director at the publishing house to find the illustrator. The art director contacts the illustrator, and at that point, for illustrators, you are working only with the art director, very occasionally with the editor, and never at all with the writer. You might have some sense that they will have looked at your sketches, but writers don't usually have veto power over any part of the book. That is all going to happen with your conversations with your art director. Now, that will be a very collaborative process, where they're going to have ideas, on character design and thumbnail design, and then covers, these sorts of things. The reason for this is that an illustrator is considered a co-creator of the book. And so the publishing house really works very hard to leave room for the illustrator to come in and kind of bring their vision to the book, whether it's a picture book, whether it's a board book, even up to chapter books. The writer doesn't say anything about that. And in a chapter book, the illustrations do less of telling of the story. They do more introducing us to the characters and the scene. But even there, the writer isn't really going to have a say over what the illustrator does. This is just so that space can be created for both. Both people have a vision for the book to bring it to the space. Now I'm going to pass it back over to Erica. And let her do her.
Awesome. Do thing. Awesome. All right. So, not through things to know about traditional publishing. The first thing we need to do is kind of understand the difference between self and traditional publishing. Because if you're really new, when you hear us say traditional publishing, or you'll hear people say trad publishing, you might be like, wait, what? Traditional publishing is the majority of what people think about when they think about, I want to try to get a book published. Someone pays you for your story. They pay to make the book, to create the book. It's not cheap. And they pay to market it. Though these days, like the slide says, a lot of that falls to you as the author anyway, especially after the first couple of months. If your publisher is going to give you any marketing attention and money, that usually happens right, like a little bit building up to your launch, and then right around your launch, and then they're moving on to other people. They have other people also publishing over and over and over again. Self-publishing is what happens when you pay to have your book published yourself. You do all of it. You not only write it, but you figure out if you need someone to edit it, if you need illustrations or cover, you pay an artist to do that. It's all on you. The creation is on you. You have to decide if you're doing just an ebook, or if you are going to pay to create hardcover or paperback copies. And then you also have to market the book yourself. You'll see there are examples at the bottom. The one in the middle, Waters of Salt and Sin, that's one of Alicia Kopic's very, very first self-published YA novels. She is super successful because it is a small business. Self-publishing, like you can just create a book and put it on the internet and people can go get it, but you will not find readers and you will not, definitely will not make any money doing it that way. To really do well in self-publishing, if you're trying to grow a readership and you're trying to make some money, you really have to treat it like a small business. So if that is something that you think that you might like to do, Alicia is teaching a self-publishing webinar. It's only $30 for Mid-South members. For SCBWI members, I think it's $45 for non-members, and it's going to be May 20th. So check that out on our website if you at all think that self-publishing is something you might want to learn more about. Most of the information in what we're talking about today is geared toward traditional publishing. A lot of people think, a lot of times it's easy to think, oh, self-publishing will just be a really easy way to get my stuff out there and get noticed. And also then I don't have to wait as long because like Susan said previously, this industry does not move quickly. It doesn't move quickly because it just doesn't move quickly. And it doesn't move quickly because revising and getting our stuff as good as it really needs to be to traditionally publish is hard and takes a lot of work. So it takes a while. And so sometimes it can be tempting to just throw something on Amazon as an ebook and self-publish because it feels like a shortcut. But there are a lot of things to consider before doing that to make sure it's really the best route for you. We are going to look at how to submit your work, whether you're talking about agents or editors. So how do we submit to agents and editors? First of all, like Susan talked about, you have to make sure that what you have written or illustrated is the best it can be, right? We're not, most of us, I only know one writer who doesn't say that they probably queried too early. Most of us ended up writing something and thinking it was so great and that it was the next Harry Potter and then started querying, only to realize that we had, a solid number of years work ahead of us to even get to the level with our craft that we really should have been querying. Research using SCBWI has the book. You'll see that here and in a number of slides in the future. It is a giant publishing guide for children. It is great. There's so much information in there, and every person who is a member of SCBWI has access to that. But research and target your literary agents or editors. Usually it's going to be agents, and we'll talk about why in a minute. But use the agency's websites, use Publishers Marketplace, use Manuscript Wishlist is what MSWL is, use Twitter, like stalk these people, not really in real life, on the internet and figure out who is a good fit for what you have written or what you've created. How do they want to receive it? That's part of the research. You're going to need to know if the agency, if they want an email with a query and 10 pages pasted in, or if they have, there are certain agencies that have a tool on their website for uploading submissions. They don't take attachments. They don't want attachments from a million random strangers. So it's really important that you look at how to format your piece and how to submit it to them because they give you instructions, and not following their instructions is a really, really quick way to just get an automatic no. If you email an agent and you call them by the wrong name because you've been copy and pasting all your queries and you're sending out a million, they're not going to be like, oh, that's fine. I'm just going to keep reading. No, a lot of times they're going to just be like, oh, well, that was an easy no. And they don't even know what your book's about because you've called them the wrong name or you've added an attachment when their instructions very clearly say not to. What is an exclusive submission? It's exactly what it sounds like. It means you're submitting to an agent or an editor, and you're giving them a period of time, usually 2 months, where they are guaranteed to be the only person seeing it. This is not something that happens often during queries. Some agents require that, but you have to decide if that is a good idea for you, because the truth of it is most people would tell you to submit in batches, like 5 to 10 queries in chunks. And whether you do that once a week or whether you do it, you wait a few weeks. If we query and we give every one person 2 months with our manuscript, it's going to take years and years and years to even get through the querying process. Same thing, if you query 10 people at a time or 15 people at a time, don't wait for everyone to say no before you move on to that next group of people. Because what we will see in our next one, post-COVID publishing, the DNR, which is the did not respond or does not respond, and long read times. It used to be very, very rare that an agent would not at least send a form letter rejection saying, thanks for your submission, this is not right for me at this time. More and more often, and it's awful, it's lame, but they're busy. They are overrun and inundated with queries and with pages and with their job for the clients they have already. Very often these days, an agent, there are certain agents that will always try to respond no matter what, even if it takes them months. But there are agents now who it's just fairly common for them. If they're not interested, they just won't answer. So don't wait for everyone to say no before you keep going. Read times are longer too. It took, in 2015, before I got my agent, it took my agent 5 months to read my full manuscript and decide that she was interested. And I don't know if it took her 5 months to even get to it, and then she read it in 3 days, or if it took her 5 months to really get through it and decide. But that was 2015. And post-COVID, most of these agents and editors are still working at home. A lot of them have small children running around. It's taking a long time. So just keep going. What's a query letter? It is the letter that you send to editors and agents to see if there's any interest in your story. It should start with a hook. It's usually 1 or 2 short paragraphs, kind of like a book jacket copy. So when you open up a hardcover book, the little, the paragraph or 2 that tries to make you want to read it, or you flip to the back of a soft cover and it's got that paragraph. Your letter usually starts with that, and then it also tells a little bit about yourself. It also tells a little bit why you chose them. You should be able to say, this is why I chose you, as an agent. This is why I'm asking you to read this. There's an SCBWI publication called Everything You Wanted to Know About Queries, but We're Afraid to Query. It's a great resource for how to write a query letter. There's also that link right there is a masterclass. It's just an article on how to write a query letter. They're very similar. Let me make sure I'm not leaving out any of my notes. Yeah, no, it's good. Also, query workshops, Publishers Weekly and Publishers Marketplace, they've done like inexpensive query workshops where you submit your query and agents actually critique it for you and like run a workshop and then critique your query. And that's actually how I met my agent first. What's a synopsis? It is hell. That is what a synopsis is. Just kidding. I'm just kidding, kind of. Synopsis is 1 to 2 pages, often single space. It is the complete plot of your story. So if you are writing a novel, usually when you're querying, they will ask for the first 10 pages or the first chapter and a synopsis. It includes everything. It is every twist, every turn, and the surprise ending. A lot of people are like, I don't want to put the ending in, it'll spoil it. Spoil it for them. That's what you're supposed to do with this piece of paper, is spoil it, because you're not trying to surprise and entertain this agent or this editor. You're asking them to become your business partner, and you're asking them to become your foremost cheerleader, and they need to know all of the details. What is a partial? So as we're querying, a partial is what it sounds like. It's a request. So you send 10 pages, you send that synopsis. It's a win. When you get someone finally emailing you back, I don't know how many of you have had this happen so far, but when someone emails you back and says, hey, I like the sound of this, will you send me the first 50 pages? Or if they request a full, will you send me the rest of it, and they will tell you how to send it. It's amazing. It's the first step forward, right? So they will tell you what to send, and they'll tell you how. They'll say, will you just send the first 50 pages as an attachment? That's where you get that green light to go ahead and send them an attachment. if those instructions, if they don't give you instructions, it's okay to respond with, oh my goodness, thank you so much for the opportunity. How would you like me to send this? Most likely they're going to feel ready to now. Nudging. So nudging is, you haven't heard from someone in a really long time. Is it okay or is it rude to email me like, hey, remember me? You're reading my stuff. Most of the time they will give you, if they ask for a partial or a full, they will try to give you a time frame. If they have given you a time frame, wait that full time frame and then wait a little bit longer. And then it's absolutely appropriate to use that same email thread so they don't lose track of who you are and say, hey, I'm so-and-so, you're reading this for me. I was just wondering if you'd had a chance to get to it yet or whatever. You absolutely can do that. It's just really important to be really professional, and it's probably not professional to do it over and over. Just like it's not professional to respond to a rejection with a defensive explanation as to why they were wrong in not picking you. Should I pay to have my book edited? If you are trying to be traditionally published, if you are going for an agent and a book deal, then no, we should be good enough at our craft that little typos aren't going to be why they don't buy our books, you guys. They're not going to, if we have little typos or we have line edit issues here or there, that's not going to be what stops someone from signing us as our agent or what stops someone from making an offer on our book. So that cost, it's really expensive to have your book professionally edited. It's very expensive. I know it. I used to do it. I was a professional copy editor for a long time. And actually, one of the reasons I stopped doing it is because it felt so icky sometimes to take that much money from people when then their manuscript would show up and I knew they weren't ready for what they were attempting. Self-publishing, so if you do go the route, you're your whole publishing team, then yeah, you probably need to pay to have someone line edit and copy edit your work. It is expensive. So do your research, talk to other people who have done it, do a sample swap to make sure the person who you're going to hire and give all this money to is actually good at what they do. What does an agent do? Agents send out your manuscript to editors. They negotiate the terms of the contract, your money, your rights, whether or not there's just all kinds of little tidbits that they are good at that I don't know enough about it. I'm really, really glad I have an agent who does. It's what she's good at. They help guide your career in terms of what to submit, what to work on. They also know these editors. So when it's time to go on submission to editors, like they have been building these relationships. And so sometimes it's really easy for an agent to go, oh, I just read this query and I know exactly who will want this book. And so those are those relationships we don't have. And some agents are editors too, either actual editors from houses, or they work more closely with you to help you tweak your work. Do you need an agent? If you want to be traditionally published, the answer is usually yes, because most publishers are closed houses, which means they don't take cold emails. We can't just query an editor at Random House or Scholastic or whatever. Smaller presses, sometimes independent presses, sometimes are still open. That is becoming less and less likely. When I very first started querying, there were definitely, I think right now, some Christian houses, some religious houses will take unagented submissions. But right now, unless you have an agent, the only way to really get access to a traditionally, to an editor at a traditional publishing house is to win an award. Sometimes you win an award and part of that winning is for an editor to read it. Attending conferences, because a lot of times editors will open up a window for submissions from people who have attended and watched them speak. Also, those paid critiques that Susan had talked about, those paid critiques are huge. A lot of times you're creating that. I have had 2 different editors look at me after giving me a critique and say, send this to me when you're done. Like, I want to see the rest of this. The first one left the publishing industry right before I finished revising. But the second one, wanted to see it. And that's it. It's those, without that process, I'm not going to say my agent wouldn't have sent to this editor, She might have. But it was huge to have someone look at me and just say, oh, I do want this, and I know who you are. And when it showed up in his inbox, he remembered it and he was excited to see it. So those are a lot of little tricks to kind of get in that door. Now I'm going to throw it back to Mary. Yeah, right.
All right, guys. Okay, Erica, are you going to let me share?
I am going to let you.
Let me
Ta-da.
share.
Let you share. My computer's reacting slowly.
There you go. Yeah, so illustrators have a work with agents also. I'm going to talk about the difference between a literary agent and an artist agent. What Erica was referring to, all the information that she just talked about, those agents are largely considered literary agents. And the difference for an illustrator between a literary agent and an artist agent or an artist rep is that a literary agent is waiting for you to create the work, and then they're going to go submit it to editors, just like Erica just outlined. So if you're an illustrator who, writes and illustrates, and you've done your own, written and illustrated your own book, that literary agent is going to then take it and look for an editor for, to buy that manuscript. If you are an illustrator and you're just creating, a series of portfolio pieces, that agent is waiting for you to send those portfolio pieces to them, and then they will go out and they have relationships with art directors and editors, and they will submit your work to them and wait for that editor to say, hey, I've got this book project that I think this illustrator that you represent would be great for. With an artist agent or an artist rep, that also happens, but artist reps are also constantly combing the market to look for projects that are already happening, and then they will bring that project back to the illustrator and say, hey, I have this project XYZ, this is how much it pays, I think you'd be great for it, is this a yes? Now, the practical difference between these two is that with a literary agent, they tend to take a percentage fee that's only about 15%. And with an artist rep, they tend to take a higher percentage, usually between 25 and 35%. And this is largely because they're always out there in the market looking for work that they can bring back to you. Now, some of this work is not going to be in the children's publishing space. It's not unusual for illustrators who are illustrating books for children to also illustrate advertising materials or do licensing agreements with greeting card companies, magazines, this sort of thing. And their agent is that artist rep is kind of always looking for that work. It may be a book, it may be a greeting card line, it may be licensing on a pillow, but they're bringing it all back to the illustrator and saying, this is everything I've got, what can you do? And they're hoping you're going to say yes to everything. Now, as far as getting an agent, and this, Erica touched on this a little bit, sometimes getting an agent is, it can be harder than getting an editor to look at your stuff, because especially in this post-COVID world, we're really not kidding when we say everyone is busy. It seems like, the whole world went home when COVID was here, and the whole world wrote a book. And so now the whole world is sending those books out to editors and agents, and places are just, they're overwhelmed and they're going through, these piles of things. For an illustrator, we're a little bit lucky that we have a little bit of a back door. And that is because as illustrators, we can send postcards directly to art directors at publishing companies. We can also professionally email art directors at publishing companies a link to our portfolio. And I personally think it's probably because we're not asking them to read an entire manuscript. We're asking them to look at one image. And art directors will do that without you having an agent. So that is a little bit of a way kind of around the gatekeepers of, of agents getting you to editors. One piece of advice I have, though, whether you are going directly to, you're going directly to an editor / art director, you don't have an agent at all, and they're now interested in hiring you to work on a book, or they're interested in buying the book that you wrote and illustrated, or for that matter, they're interested in buying the book that you just wrote, is always understand the contract that you're going to sign. There are lots of resources for this. There's lots of resources through SCBWI that will give you access to people who can look over a publisher's contract just so you understand it. The Writers Guild will also look at contracts just for writers. They won't do it for illustrators, but if you're a member of the Writers Guild for free, they will look over any contract that you have from a publisher. And by the same token, if you're about to sign a contract with an agent, there are attorneys, and again, SCBWI is a good resource for this. There are attorneys who will just look at the contract you're about to sign with an agent. They might give you advice and say, hey, think about this, or this is how this might impact your career down the way. Or they might say, this is pretty typical. This contract looks pretty boilerplate. I feel like you're protecting your future to sign it. But my advice, born of many, many years of both negotiating my own contracts before I had an agent, as well as understanding the contracts that have come to me through my agent, is to just always, always, always understand what you're signing before you sign it. And if you have questions, I personally believe no one looks out for your career and no one looks out for your money as well as you do. So you're not going to hurt your agent's feelings by asking them questions about their contract. You're not going to hurt your editor's feelings by asking questions either directly to the editor or through an agent about the contract. None of that is considered unprofessional if you do it as politely as possible and as clearly as possible. They're actually expecting you to do that. Nobody wants you to get into a situation where they're trying to take work from you or slip a fast one past you. That is not how this industry works, but it is on you to make sure you understand that. So let's talk a little bit about this industry and the market, because I really believe that tip number 3, understand the market, know who is buying what and where they are, is so important to our, to your future, to your ability to have this as a career. So you might have heard each of us mention these terms, trade, or the educational market, or even mass market. You might have seen this on blogs out there. Publishing is sort of generally split into these 3 different markets. Mass market is the idea of Target, Walmart, Costco, anywhere volume matters, volume of sales matters. So these are buyers who are going to buy many thousands of copies of your book and put them in stores all over North America, and they're expecting to move a lot of books. I'm going to jump down a couple of bullets here to trade. Trade is what we think of as your corner bookstore or Barnes and Noble. Books A Million sort of straddles between mass market and trade. They kind of buy off of both sides of that market, but it's probably closer to trade than it is to Target. But trade is what's considered selling to the trade. In other words, someone's coming in, they're looking for that very special picture book that they're going to, give at a baby shower. And, they're about to purchase a book with a price point close to $20. On the flip side of that, mass market, because it's selling a lot of books, the price point's going to be a little bit lower. So here you're going to be looking less at, the very specially created jacketed picture book and more at the licensed property. Maybe it's a Cartoon Network tie-in book, which you can be hired as a writer to create that property, but you're going to be using Cartoon Network's characters. They're going to have their designers put the characters on the cover of the book, and the whole book is going to sell for a little bit less money than you would see in trade. Now, for an educational market, these are books that are like the leveled readers and easy readers, which may also be sold in either one of these other places I've just said, either mass market, Walmart, Target, or in Barnes and Noble, your corner bookstore. But the educational market is also going directly into schools. And a lot of times the writing here and the illustration is being used to support curriculum. So the big textbook publishers may publish lots of, smaller books that sort of go along with a section in the textbook or in the curriculum. And the books that are going to be created for the educational mark support that as well. So what you need to listen for if you're getting your work critiqued by an editor at a conference, at a webinar like this, what you need to listen for and even ask if they don't say is, I'd really like to aim this manuscript or this illustration at trade. Do you think this is ready for trade? And listen to what they say. If they say, yes, if this, well, yes, if you do your characters this way, take that advice. Or if they say, this feels really solidly mass market. I really think that we can get a series out of this book. We're just going to, put a bunch of, several thousand out there. This feels very commercial and mass market to me. That's how they're seeing it. They're not seeing it being in the window of your corner bookstore. They're seeing it on the shelves of Target, Walmart, Costco, that sort of thing. A writer can hear that and go, wow, I'd love to be in Target. And of course, we all would. However, what you should know is that the contracts for mass market and trade can be different. Remember what I just said about Cartoon Network. You're probably not going to be being given a contract that is an advance against royalties at that point because you're working with some other corporation's property. There are lots of different little nuances that get into, okay, yes, you're selling, 10,000 books through Walmart. But how your pay structure for that can be a little bit different than being the traditional Barnes and Noble, book that's sitting on a shelf of Barnes and Noble. And this is another reason why I get back to it's very important to understand the contract that you're signing. So how to do the research on all these different markets. SCBWI has a fantastic resource called the Market Survey. It's in the book, which if you're an SCBWI member, you can download from the website. It's a big, long PDF. And a big chunk of that is just a survey of all the different publishers, the various imprints of those publishers, and who is an editor or an art director at each one of those publishers. It will even break it down so far as to say how they like to receive work. However, in my opinion, I strongly encourage you to use the Market Survey as a starting point and not your end all be all. So in other words, if you're researching, hey, I think this editor is at this publishing house and I'd like to submit some work directly to them, I highly recommend checking out places like LinkedIn and Twitter to see if they're still there, if they've recently reported a move. Another great resource that keeps up with who is moving where in publishing is Harold Underdown's. It's literally titled Who's Moved Where. So if you just Google Harold Underdown, he has a whole site that most of the site is geared for professionals in publishing. So not for writers and illustrators, but for editors and publishers, the people who work at the publishing houses. But his Who's Moved Where section, he keeps up to date every month. Some other resources, Publishers Weekly, which is considered like the periodical Bible of publishing. It keeps up with all publishing news everywhere. They have an email that comes out twice a week called the Children's Bookshelf, and it's just about news in the children's publishing industry. And then Publishers Marketplace is the same way. Publishers Marketplace has a free side that gives a little bit of information, but they also have a subscription side because they're, again, geared more towards the industry, less towards writers and illustrators. But writers and illustrators can certainly get a lot out of their site, especially if you do the subscription base, because it is literally going to list every deal made, who the writer was, who the illustrator was, who the agent was, who the editor was, and they will even go so far as to list it as, in a good deal, in a nice deal, at auction in a 3-book deal. So you can really get a lot of information from that paid side of Publishers Marketplace. And it's not just publishing, i.e. books, that you can begin to get both experience and income from when it comes to writing and illustrating for children. Lots of writers get their experience writing in the magazine marketplace. Highlights, the Cricket Magazine Group, illustrators get a lot of work there as well. Highlights has several different publications, from, you know, babies, very like kind of short, sturdy magazines, almost like the board book of magazines, all the way up to, you know, middle school age magazines for those kids that come out every month. Libraries get them, schools get them, and the Cricket Magazine Group is the same way. The market survey that's part of that SCBWI book lists the magazine guide as a separate part of the market survey. And then my final little piece of information, my little piece of advice about this is to do what I call the mental Rolodex. So from here on out, from this day forward, if you're interested in writing or illustrating for children, every piece of media that you pick up that you think, oh, this looks like something I could write, or I really like this artwork, this is what I want to do. Every piece of media that you pick up, you flip it around until you find who created it and when. And then you track it to its source. So if you're in a bookstore and you're flipping through books and you pick up a book that you really love, look at who published it and when. And if you do this enough, you will build up just a mental tally of who is publishing what and where your work might fit into the marketplace. And when I say track it to its source, that's one of the ways you go back and find, okay, this was, you know, this book was published by Doubleday. I'm going to use Publishers Marketplace, the information I have on Publishers Marketplace, to find out who the editor and the agent were involved in this deal. And then I'm going to use that book as a comp title for my manuscript. And I'm going to say, I see that you represented title A. I think it is excellent. My book is title A meets title B with a twist. And you obviously explain that twist, and that's your pitch to your agent. But you are able to do that because you have taken the time to pay attention to every piece of media, magazine, book, whatever that you picked up where you think your work is similar to that. Now, I just mentioned all the different things that SCBWI has in that market survey. And you might have noticed that this whole webinar has been kind of structured around the top 3 things. And the idea behind that was we realized that combined together, all of us here have probably over 50 years worth of experience in writing and illustrating for children. And to be honest with you, it's very hard to get all of that information out in a 1-hour webinar. So we kind of boiled it down to the 3 things that we thought was most important for you guys to know. And that doesn't end when we get to SCBWI. I always say that SCBWI joining it was the single best decision I ever made for my career. If someone came to me and said, you know, name the one decision that you made, Mary, in your career that made all the difference in the world, I would say it was when I joined SCBWI. And they did not pay me to say that, I promise. But here's why I say that. And Erica and Susan are going to jump in with their little pieces of this. But for me, it gave me access to the experts. So obviously we hope you've learned a lot from this webinar so far. But one of the main missions of the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators is to educate and inform rising book creators and how to make their craft better. And to be honest, the people who are best positioned to do that are the people, you know, who have been doing it a long time and who, you know, who have a heart for helping the next generation coming up, you know, the next new writer, the next new illustrator. And SCBWI is a great gateway for that. I'll let Erica talk about her best thing.
SCBWI also, I talked about it a little bit earlier. when we were talking about conferences and critiques, gives you access to editors, agents, and art directors. These are people who we've said it, they're really busy. They have a job, they have a huge job, they have families. They're not out looking for us anymore, really. And so sometimes it can be hard to get in front of them, and it can be hard to make them pay attention. So what SCBWI does is it helps put you in places where you can start creating those relationships. And you may, so whether you're getting a critique from an editor or an agent, right? And you make a you make a good impression just as a person. You have a good time for those 15 minutes face to face, or you pay for a webinar that they do, or you go to a conference and you get that, they allow you, they open up submissions for 2 months for anyone who attended that conference or whatever. SCBWI, and it's not just in the Mid-South, all over the world, you have those connections to editors and agents and art directors and the people who we all want to get in front of.
And it's my turn now. And this is one of my very, very favorite things about the SCBWI. And that is just the access to the entire community of creators. I'm telling you. So writing for children, it is not a sprint. It is a marathon. You're going to be in it for the long run if you're really serious about it. I mean, you're going to be in it for the long run. And in that marathon, it's hard. I mean, there's going to be a lot of discouragement. There's going to be frustration. There's going to be a lot of rejection. I mean, I have quite a few books published, but I've got 5 manuscripts out there now that I'm just, collecting rejections. It's just constant. But the thing that gets me through that is, I'm going to let you advance. These people, these are your people. These are your community, and we all support each other. The people that I have met through the SCBWI have just become my best friends in life. We have so much in common, and we so support each other through all of those frustrations, and we commiserate when the rejections come in, and we celebrate every little success, because I mean, that's whether you get an agent, whether you got, you hear back from your editor that they're going to take your book to acquisitions. Every little step along the way gets celebrated with your people. And I think that, when it comes down to it, I think we're all in this because we believe in the power of books, and we believe that we can enrich kids' lives through children's books. And just keep in mind that your voice is unique. Nobody can do you like you can. So we've got one more slide. We're going to do, I'm going to show you a video. And when that's over, we're going to turn it over to you guys for some questions and answers.
Nobody tells people who are beginners. And I really wish somebody had told this to me, is that all of us who do creative work, like, we get into it, and we get into it because we have good taste. But it's like there's a gap that for the first couple of years that you're making stuff, what you're making isn't so good. Okay, it's not that great. It's trying to be good. It has ambition to be good, but it's not quite that good. But your taste, the thing that got you into the game, your taste is still killer, and your taste is good enough that you can tell that what you're making is kind of a disappointment to you. You know what I mean? A lot of people never get past that phase. A lot of people at that point, they quit. And the thing I would just say to you with all my heart is that most everybody I know who does interesting creative work, they went through a phase of years where they had really good taste. They could tell what they were making wasn't as good as they wanted it to be. They knew it felt short. It didn't have this special thing that we wanted it to have. And the thing I would say to you is everybody goes through that. And for you to go through it, if you're going through it right now, if you're just getting out of that phase, you got to know it's totally normal. And the most important possible thing you could do is do a lot of work, do a huge volume of work. Put yourself on a deadline so that every week or every month, you're going to finish one story. Because it's only by actually going through a volume of work that you're actually going to catch up and close that gap. And the work you're making will be as good as your ambitions. In my case, like I took longer to figure out how to do this than anybody I've ever met. It takes a while. It's going to take you a while. It's normal to take a while, and you just have to fight your way through that. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Wow. So thanks for listening, guys. I think Chris was checking on our questions. So if you've got questions, drop them in.
I'm going to go ahead and answer. Janet Lee asked a while back about comp titles. She says, is it fair to say that a comp title should also be a book that you think the audience for your book would like? If they bought one, they would likely buy the other, in your opinion? Yeah, I mean, that is kind of what a comp title is, right? Like, if you like this, you will like this. And the other thing I will say for comp titles is the couple of rules you will hear over and over again is you don't often use the really crazy big books. You don't use J.K. Rowling and Rick Riordan. You don't, but I mean, sometimes you can't help but use certain things, but it's that. And then you use newer ones. You try not to use books from 25 years ago. You try to use books that are recent in the last 5 years or so, if not in the last few years. And then the other thing I will say about comp titles is sometimes you'll see it a lot now, especially in middle grade and YA, especially in YA, it won't always be books. Sometimes it will be a book and a TV show. It'll be like my book is Six of Crows meets Umbrella Academy. And some editor is going to be like, I'm sorry, what? Please send that to me. And so there's other media that you can use as well.
We have a question from Hannah. She's saying, can a writer-illustrator duo publish traditionally, or would they have to self-publish?
So a writer illustrator duo, I'm thinking this is, two different people. It's somewhat uncommon. And that's simply because, say you send in the dummy book, which for the record, even as a writer illustrator duo, you're not going to send in a completely fully illustrated manuscript. You're going to send in a dummy, which is the words, plus just sketches, and maybe a couple of finished illustrations, the cover and an interior illustration. It's also totally fine to send in just sketches, and it's totally fine to send in sketches with a cover and no other interior illustrations. That's what a dummy is considered. And so here's the thing. Here's the reason I say it's somewhat uncommon is because once that dummy lands on the editor's desk, the editor could look at it and go, wow, I love this manuscript. I love this story. I know just the illustrator for it, right? And you're new. And so sometimes what they want to do is pair you up with a hotshot illustrator who they know, with your name might not sell a book, but Dan Santat definitely will. And so they're going to put your manuscript with a more well-known illustrator, for the purposes of selling this book, right? Which is what everybody wants. And, at the same time, they might look at it and go, wow, I love both of these. I love both this manuscript and the art. But they also know that they have got another book on the list that's got art very similar to this, or another competing, list out there has got art very similar to it. And so they might be like, we just kind of don't want to position this book, with these two art styles that are very similar, because that could have the effect of, not like one book isn't going to stand out in the market. And nobody wants that, right? Because remember, at the end of the day, this is a business and we are trying to sell some books. And then the third thing is, they could say, wow, I really love this art. This art is great. This manuscript is just not speaking to me. And that doesn't mean the manuscript is bad. Over and over again, you're going to hear from editors that say, this is a great idea for a story, but it's just not my cup of tea. And that just means that their taste doesn't run towards that. But they still like the art, and so maybe they're like, wow, I like this art. We have this other manuscript that's come in. We'd like to put this new illustrator with this, high profile writer, because this new illustrator's name isn't going to sell a book, but this high profile writer's name will. And so it's kind of the reverse of what I just said with Dan Santat. So that's kind of typically the three ways an editor will look at a duo coming in. Now, I like to say that the rule in publishing is there are no rules. And so it is, when I say it's uncommon, it is not completely unheard of. And it is entirely possible that that story and that art could land on the editor's desk, and they could look at it and they could go, wow, everything about this just blows me away. I love the story. I love the art. Nothing out there in the marketplace looks like this right now. For the record, every single editor thinks that way. They all think about, what does the market look like? What is on my list? What is on other editors at my house's list? What I know of other houses, what's on their list? Because, at the end of the day, it's a business. They're trying to sell some books, and they don't want them competing against each other. And say all those things line up. They love it. They love the art. And there's no other book coming out like it right now. At that point, the stars have aligned, and yes, they could come back to you and say, wow, we really like to make you an offer on this. But in order to get to that point, those earlier things I said are the hurdles that you're going to jump over before you get to the point of, of the editor coming back to you with an offer. I want to throw out one thing too about self-published works, because we didn't really touch on this, but it is something, especially for picture books, that I think people should understand. Libraries, schools and libraries, which are a huge buyer of picture books, they go through a lot of books, right? Their books are constantly coming off their shelves, coming back on their shelves, and they're getting torn up really fast. They usually are bound with a thing called library binding, which is just an extra strong binding so that the book can, go through a lot of little hands and not get, demolished. It is harder and more expensive for self-publishers to do this. Schools and libraries are not a huge fan of buying paperback books, which is what a lot of self-published picture books are, simply because they just get torn up, and it becomes a money swamp for schools and libraries, have to keep replacing this book, right? Because it's getting torn up. On the bookstore side of things, they're less worried about that because they're only going to sell the book one time, and they're not going to worry about getting it back. But what self-publishers sometimes don't understand is that bookstores are also going to ask for a discount that can be usually around 40% and sometimes more than that. And self-publishers are just not positioned to be ready to give that discount. And in the book buying business, it's weird in that bookstores expect to be able to send back and get a return on any books that don't sell in their store, and self-publishers kind of don't realize that's coming back to them too, that the bookstore is going to expect them to buy back whatever didn't sell. So if you decide to go the route of self-publishing, just like how I just said about editors, these are the hurdles you're going to have to jump over to get to that point. As a self-publisher of picture books, those are the hurdles that you're going to have to jump over to get your duo book out into the marketplace. Not trying to be discouraging on either side. It's just that's the reality of of the publishing world.
Yeah. Right. Absolutely. Okay, we have another question from Janet saying, how often is the market survey updated? I was thinking, do you know?
Yeah, it is annually. I mean, they
Yes.
do update it annually. Not quite sure what time of year though.
I think they work on it from about January to August. But this is why I said I use it as a starting point and not as an end all be all, because I am pretty dedicated to keeping up my own sort of, knowledge of the marketplace. And I have found things that I know have stayed in the market survey for years that are kind of a little bit outdated. So I think it's a good place to start. But if you're really, really honing in on a house or an editor, man, those other resources cannot be beat because they are updated like this. Whereas the market survey, I think, gets updated over a series of months. You know, Publishers Marketplace and Publishers Weekly are getting that information and they're putting it out there immediately within weeks, you know, of whatever the changes are. Yeah.
Mhm. We have a question from Maggie asking if you have any recommendations on how to protect your content as you move through the process.
Maggie, I don't know if you're a writer or an illustrator. As a writer, I know that this is something that really new writers are really worried about, someone stealing our stuff or our great ideas. And you don't have to worry about that. Back when I was very first starting, people would say, if you're really worried about it, you can email a copy of your manuscript to yourself because that puts that time stamp on it and that date. You've got proof. If you have created it, it is yours. And the expectation is that it is already yours. You don't have to copyright it. You don't have to do anything like that. Also, the way manuscript, the way Word documents and things like that work now, like every time it saves, there's a timestamp on it. So if for some reason you ended up seeing a piece of your work on the internet, you have a very easy way to tell or show that that is your content and that you can date when you created it. I don't actually know anyone. I think it's more common for published works to be pirated or to be used as part of a scam than it is for those of us who are just in the process of writing and learning and sharing to be taken advantage of, if that makes sense. I didn't know if it's different from a illustrator point of view.
Well, I was going to say, and all that same information applies, you know, to an illustrator as well. I mean, copyright law says that the minute you create it, you own the copyright to it. And just to piggyback on that, though, I will say one thing I would keep in mind is that this industry does not make money off of stealing ideas. Nobody wants to do that. You know, if an editor was doing that, if an agent, you know, was somehow doing that, they would find themselves in a lot of trouble really quickly. And it's a very reputation based, you know, this is kind of a reputation based world we live in. And, you know, if someone was suspected of taking credit for someone else's work, man, their calls would never be answered. Their emails would never be answered. So it's kind of one of those things where, you know, when you think about, oh, you know, someone kind of taking my work, which is not a comfortable feeling to feel, you've just got to realize that is not how people make money in this industry, right? Like you're actually being protected by the way the market works. And then secondarily to that, if you were to get a contract, there is a section of the contract that says you have the legal right to enter into this contract, meaning you are not borrowing from someone else's copyright. You created the work, it's yours, you didn't take anybody else's, and you know you're going to sign that. The minute you sign that, and if you know there was some steely action happening, you would actually be liable to the publisher for everything they paid you. And that's another thing that's kind of protecting us all, you know, is because the industry itself is trying to be on the up and up. They don't profit by you know, unscrupulous practices like that.
I will also add, because of something you said, Mary, the idea of it being a small industry. I feel like especially for people who are starting out, when we're very first starting out pursuing publication, it feels so big, right? It feels so big to have a book out. It feels so big to have a book deal. And we can look at the industry as some giant corporate monster that just seems huge. And it really isn't. It is a very small industry. All the people in it know one another and they know one another well. And if you stick around, you will also get to know who has the reputation as the amazing agents and who has the reputation that almost got burned to the ground because they have screwed people over, or they have, you know, just been unscrupulous in the way that they've dealt with their clients, or they never answer their email. Like you learn, and they learn this about each other. last time I went on submission, my agent was like, look, if this particular house is your dream, then I will submit to them. But right now I'm not giving them anything because I'm angry. It's a lot smaller. And which also means if you are unprofessional in a query during a critique, people will remember your name.
Yes, yes, that is
Yeah.
very true.
Right.
And I'm gonna add one, not to be jumping back and forth, but I'm gonna add one thing onto that. And that is, so what you should understand, what can be copyrighted is the execution of the idea, but not the idea itself. So, you know, you drew a dog, you wrote a story about a dog. That story, the words, the way you strung them together, that is the thing that can be copyrighted. Your creation of the character of the dog, that is what can be copyrighted. But your idea about this dog picking up this red ball, ideas cannot be copyrighted. So this is something that happens fairly frequently. Someone will, you know, they will have gone out on submission with a bedtime story, right? And they're thinking bedtime story, bedtime story. The next thing you know, lo and behold, sitting there on the bookshelf is a bedtime story, which seems very similar to yours. I've talked to many new writers, new illustrators who immediately go to, oh my God, they must have seen my stuff. Nope, they probably didn't, because that book that was sitting on the bookshelf that you just saw today, that just came out, was probably acquired 3 years ago, and went through a editing and an illustrating process, which means it was written even before that. So it would have been impossible for them to have, quote, seen your idea. It's just the idea that some things are universal: bedtime, dogs, cats, you know, birthdays, scary stories. These are all universal ideas. And this kind of goes back to what Susan was saying about read, read, read. You know, if you have a very deep understanding of the market, you will know, oh my goodness, I can't write this bedtime book because I feel like I've seen this bedtime book a few times. And how am I going to really make my bedtime book stand out from, you know, the one that's about to come out? But it's just a matter of course that you may be working on an idea and then someone, you know, pops out with an idea that someone pops out with that same book. I mean, that has happened to me at least 2 times that I'm aware of. And it is frustrating. It is disappointing, you know, because you kind of realize I've got to put my manuscript away. I've got to put my story away, or I've got to change it because this other book is out and it's, you know, it's kind of sucking all the air out of the room for that particular idea. That's just part of this industry. That's part of the marathon, y'all. But your best antidote to that is to just really stay on top of what is being published, so you kind of know how to fit your idea into the cracks and crevices that have not been covered yet.
We also have a question from Hannah asking if you have any tips about a kid-lit artist portfolio. She says, I've heard draw kids a lot.
Yes, draw kids, draw, you know, drawing kids, yes, for sure. And actually, here's why I say this. I don't know, Hannah, if you're out on Instagram right now, May is like Draw Babies Month. And there's all these like Draw Babies challenges. And that's actually because illustrators, unless you're doing it a lot, children are actually hard to draw because they have these giant heads and giant eyes and teeny weeny short legs. And if you're not really used to drawing children, art directors can tell you're struggling. And, you know, you've got to make this character work over 32 pages. And, you know, they want to look at your work and feel confident that this artist is going to be able to repeat this character, you know, 32 times and be believable, you know. So yes, to drawing kids of different ages. If you're focused on picture books, you know, kind of think of that 8 years and younger. If you're thinking middle grade, you know, think 8 years old to 11 years old, kind of that middle grade age. It's good to have a variety. It's good to have a variety of expressions, you know, kind of going back to what I said about don't have them all smiling at the camera, you know, like anger, fear, disgust is a lot more interesting than happiness. And there's a lot more story in anger, fear, and disgust than there is in happiness. So put some of that in there, right? And then just always think about story. How can you get story into your art? It's also not a bad idea, try to show the same character over 2 to 3 spreads, just to show that you can do this, that you can carry a character over multiple pages. And again, that character is going to be having different expressions and in different positions, but it will be believable as the same character. I don't know. I'm sure there's a bunch of other stuff I could say to that, but Susan, I'm going to let you talk because it's always good to
Yeah.
get more than one person's
Well,
opinion.
one of the things I was just going to say, and I remember, I've had many portfolio reviews over the years, and I remember one art director saying something to me that really, it just made sense to me. He said, I can usually tell when I'm looking at a portfolio whether you are an animal person or a people person. He said, usually an artist has a preference. They can, like for me, I love to do animals. I struggle with people, even though I do it. But you'll often have, you'll often have an inclination towards one or the other. And use it to your, certainly play to your strengths. That doesn't mean, avoid all hands, avoid all people. I mean, you do need to you do need to put that in your portfolio for sure, and again, try to up your game and do it over and over and over. But do realize what your strengths are, and for me, it's animals more so than people.
Yeah, I agree with that. The other thing I would say is, if there's something you absolutely hate drawing, do not put that in your portfolio. I cannot stand drawing bicycles. I hate them.
Oh
And I had a bicycle in my portfolio, and I got hired to do a book about bicycles.
Oh,
That's great.
So just word of warning there.
Oh my gosh. Well, thanks, you guys. I actually do not see any more questions in there.
Awesome.
Well, this has been great. So thanks so much to everybody for sticking with us here. And we have recorded this. So if you want to go back, we'll post that recording link a little bit later on in the week. But you'll be able to go back and review things if you need to.
Absolutely.
Anybody
Oh,
else?
One more pop in.
Thank you. No, thank you.
Thank you.
You're
welcome.
Susan Weaver Jones. Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you all so much for coming.
Yeah. We so appreciate it. All right. Bye.
Hi, everyone.
Yes.